We call the Springfield City Council work session to order with a roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon,
Here.
Counselor Weber. Here. Counselor Moe.
Here.
Counselor Rodley. Here. Counselor Blackwell. Here. Counselor Buck
Here.
and Counselor Stout.
Here, thank you. We have one item this evening. It is the fire governance conversation. Before I turn it over to Nancy to introduce this item, I just want to say, Chief, really good to see you and your staff. I know it's Veterans Day tomorrow, and we're going to be out at the PD, so we're not going to see a lot of the fire folks, but would you please extend our thanks on behalf of the Springfield community to the people in the department that serve this country?
We absolutely will. Thank you.
Nancy, could you please introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for remembering our veterans. This evening we have Chief Caven here and Deputy Chief Basket. I hope you're Deputy Chief or is it Assistant Chief? Which one? Oh man, did I just promote you? I might have. Okay, to talk about, do a report regarding the governance of the fire department. As you know, we have a functionally consolidated department with the city of Eugene, and we have a task force that was working diligently on what would be the future of this department and some potential options. And this evening is really to talk about a couple of those options. We're not asking you to make a final decision at this time, but there's a lot of information to absorb and digest. And this is why we have the professionals at the table here to kick off this presentation. So I'm going to hand this over to Chief.
Thank you, City Manager Newton, Mayor, Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Do you want questions along the way, or do you want us to try to hold it? We've all been through the presentation, so do you want us to ask as we go, or you want to hold them until the end?
I think it might work best just so everybody sees it and kind of hears the rhythm to hold them. That way I keep on a cadence with the shorter time frame.
Okay, perfect. So, we'll do that then.
And I take just a point of personal privilege before we start to say our gratitude to the Springfield community for the passage of the fire levy this past Tuesday. Means a lot to the fire department, the firefighters, to have the community support. So as City Manager Newton said, we're here to talk about fire governance. We're going to focus on a couple specific items. It's kind of long, but as she mentioned, we're going to focus on two specific areas, the ones that seem to have the most interest, either out in the public with the labor union and or with the intergovernmental entity as recommended by the consultants. So the information that's contained herein is specific to Springfield when we get down to the root of the data. But we're going to talk about all of the models at one point. We're going to dig deep on those two and then kind of talk about what might come next or what's on the horizon for us. As when we covered this in Eugene on the 22nd, there's many different audiences that we're speaking to. Obviously, our elected officials, the community that's watching, the firefighters, and many folks who have had a role in how we got here and have an interest in where we end up going. So our community receives excellent support from our fire department. We're incredibly proud of the firefighters that serve it. But as we spend time on these challenges, it's important to remember why we're doing the work, and we'd work to identify a North Star of how we measure our outcomes, and looking for stable, efficient, scalable governance model that ensures long-term stability and grows with the community it serves are very important pieces of this equation. Whoops, wrong button. As we go on, the other outcomes that we look towards come right from the AP Triton report. I won't read each of them verbatim. I think you guys have been in and out of that report. But that, big things is the sustainability and the growth of our fire department is achievable with the model that we choose. So when we think about our needs, we think about fire and life safety services. They're not something you really want to reactively plan for. We need to be proactively planned and resourced. And I think the good quote is the best plan or the best day to plan for your worst day is not the day after. So we think about our future. It's, a future that's stable, predictable, the ability to plan and innovate The ability to respond to the community's growing needs in particular is we continue to hear good information about investments in downtown Springfield that are coming. Fire department needs to be able to adapt and have the resources to meet the need to protect Springfield. We think about the resources that are needed today, and as we think about the future, we know that ambulance funding is a challenge. You've all seen it on Nate's 5-year forecast. Assets, the growth of support, training, and administrative components of our organization to modernize. And then the ability to work on capital improvement, debt service options. So we know we have deferred maintenance in our stations. We know that some need to be potentially moved and or rebuilt. And so we need a future that allows us to tackle those very issues. There were 5 models that were explored. Those started with keeping it currently organized, one city providing service to another, i.e. contract, the establishment of an IGE, a fire district, or the dissolution of the current merger. When we think about the 2 we're talking about, as I mentioned, we'll go over the fire district and the IGE. But as we move into this conversation, I think it's important to reiterate, and it was reiterated on the 22nd, that being individual departments isn't something to be afraid of if we're not able to find a sustainable path forward for our organization. So we'll dive right into the fire district information. On this first slide is just a representative look of the tan areas are our jurisdictions in the city of Eugene, city of Springfield, and those different shades of pink, salmon, or wherever we might debate those colors are the rural districts that surround our communities today. When we think about forming the fire district, really, if either city chose to form a fire district on its own, the statute doesn't actually allow that to occur. You either need to join with typically a rural fire department to share service or to annex into, but you just can't decide that, well, we want a district to provide this specific provision within our already existing geopolitical boundaries. And so that's out of the question. Annexing to a special or annexing to an existing district is the path that we could take. And this is just a small list of the challenges that we would need to cross to make that happen. The existing district has to have interest. As we talk about that district here shortly, I'll mention that nobody is engaged with that district to see if they're interested in annexing our cities or not. But you think about their votes, you think about the city council votes to refer it, the metro plan work, city code changes, assets. I mean, there's a lot of complication. I just want to bring up the short list as to not get way down into the weeds tonight about what would it actually take. But it's a fair amount of work and a lot of people agreeing in the affirmative along the way. So this slide, we're kind of focusing on the Willa-Kinsey Fire District. And the reason that is that's the one district that has a tax rate sufficient to absorb our needs and fund it effectively. As a note, back in 2004, both cities took a look at this district for the potential of moving fire services 20 years ago. This map shows you the UGB that we'd be looking to serve, and those green outlined areas are the relatively small areas that the Willa-Kinsey Fire District still continues to serve within our area. As I mentioned, the district is essentially a new government, and therefore it's subject to all of the same limitations and restrictions as the city of Springfield would be. Frustrations with limited property tax growth are the same. And again, we're focusing on specifically information as it relates to Springfield. We're going to use the tax rates of the Willa-Kinsey Rural Fire Protection District, which has a rate of approximately 307 per thousand. As you'll see in later slides, the city of Springfield's entire permanent rate is roughly 472 per thousand. This is, as we talk about it, the maximum case scenario. So it's important to look, is probably most of you are aware, if there is a new taxing district, nobody legally gives up their taxing authority. And so you could potentially expect from day one that all legally assessable taxes would be assessed. And we're going to work through that. While it's possible that the city could choose to lower rates to offset, in particular, the fire levy, but in some cases in the report, we talked about going further to offset that. We also know that there isn't really no way that the city could offset the entire 307 rate it would take to service that fire district. It's also important to look at what's possible and likely. And so we don't want to say that it's on every slide, but we're trying to share the scale of the numbers to help folks understand how these two compare and contrast against each other. It's meant to be unbiased and kind of in that worst case scenario. As we narrow the options, we'll need to continue refining that data into the future. Nate does an amazing job in going through tax compressions and limitations. So I'm going to buzz through this slide really quick about Measure 5 and its limiting real market value. And the compression occurs at the individual property level, and most property owners don't know that they're compressed today. So this example is, with a picture, but is a property here in Springfield. This is their tax bill. This is designed to kind of show where general government comes from. It says it right there. That's the county, the city, and any special districts that exist, and including any operating levies that exist in that space, and the total amount that you're paying. The new district will fall within that general government rate, as we know. And it's how that general government rate is set off of your real market value, not your assessed value. And so the amount of taxes a property can absorb are higher than what we've all been trained to look at, the $10 per thousand cap on taxes. And we'll continue to kind of go through this and refine it. You don't have to remember all that off of just one slide. This is that house. We pulled the URAs out, and so that top number is or that top list of taxes are a representative number, but not everything that makes up this individual property's tax bill. When we, sorry about that. When we look at how your property is capped, it's again $10 on your real market value, or for this specific property, $5,357. If we add Willa-Kinsey to the equation, we add another $886 to this specific property, taking our general government cap from $1,078 to $1,347, or $3,894. As you'll notice, it's still far short of what the general government cap is, even though your tax rate exceeds $10 per thousand. This is just to reiterate that again, this property's real market value would allow it to be taxed up to $5,300 based on its assessed value, with the fire district on top of existing taxes and backing the levy out. That new permanent rate for general government would be $1,347 per thousand. What's this mean? This property can absorb another $776 in taxes before they reach compression. This is just an example. If you've looked at the tax records, there's usually a plotted map of your assessed value. That's the red line. The light blue line is your property value. And then dark blue line is your property value with this improvement value. As we move through that, your $10 per thousand in times of economic downturn can start to compress as those numbers get narrow. As you recall, we really felt that following the 2008 recession in 2010 to 14 in local government, and we still feel the effects today. So let me catch. This is just taking a look at neighborhood. So look at that same property tax bill and grab just a few different examples of properties here in Springfield. This home built in 2000 at 1,600 square feet. It could be taxed up to $18.52 before it's compressed. Another example, and we'll see these houses a little closer in their full cost here in a moment. This house could go $20.50 before it's compressed, which are not small numbers when you think about the actual cost. And then 1716 for this home that was built in 1964. The point of this slide, one, is to show not only the different ways value come into play, but the inequity of when your home was assessed and its real market to assessed value transition. We didn't have available to us the same compression data that Eugene did for the presentation over there to find a property, a specific home that was in compression. And so we'll talk about how that works here in a moment. But nonetheless, it can be quite a challenge. Okay. So this is those same three properties and the way their homes experienced market corrections or adjustments. And so you can see as everybody feels it differently at different times. And if that real market value dips below the assessed value, that's where you see significant losses in the system. Commercial property, what's important to understand about commercial properties is they almost exclusively are riding pretty close to compression. We'll see a map a little while later, but based on how they come onto the tax rolls, but also how they interact with not only their property, but the personal property that they get taxed on. So this is Walmart here in Springfield. As you see, its real market value, assessed value are identical. What that means is there is no collection beyond the $10 per thousand. So today, their maximum taxation or assessment would be $205,799. If we were to apply the full rate, assuming that the Willikinzie Fire District was here, that property tax would be $277,000. What does that mean? That means, well, a little excited there. That means with the Measure 5 limit, there's $71,000 worth of taxes that we're not able to collect in the district situation. So these are the same properties that we just talked about, and this is to look at what then do they experience with taxes if there was a district annexation. And as you can tell, from a monthly basis, it's not inexpensive. From 65 all the way down to 49, or about $500 a month if we were able to achieve tax collection from commercial properties. I did look up beloved former counselor's tax situation, and the taxes on that property would be about $45 more per month if there was an annexation. There's not as much spread in the real market to assessed value on the home, but it could still absorb, like all of these houses, that district and end up paying the full cost. So how likely is compression based on property types? If you're familiar with the property tax change property ratio, this is when a property is assessed, how much is it assessed, and the business personal property, it's 1-to-1, machinery, equipment. Those that do the state appraised industrial and central assessment, I'm not an expert on that, why people choose to go that route. Industrial county appraised, and you can see is housing takes the biggest gap, which means housing, whether it multifamily or residential, are going to pay the full brunt in most cases. So compression is less likely for homes, more likely in that business and personal property. So the inverse of looking at it, less versus more. This is a heat map of what Springfield looks like. The darker orange are those commercial properties that are nearing compression, and in some cases over compression. And then the lighter properties are the least compressed in that list. These are revenue considerations. General fund plus the fire levy is about $17 million. When we look at where the district would fit in our property taxes here, in that $10 for general fund or $10 for general government, and then no limit on bonds. This is an example, and again, as I mentioned, City of Eugene got to the county assessor early before they realized how much work it would be to help us understand the impacts of compression. And so this slide is in reference to how it would be experienced there. We don't yet have that data for Springfield, but we do know we have individual properties in compression, every year. So, but for example, in Eugene, if they were to annex to the district, there'd be 2.3 million loss to compression. The county, 1.7 million. The fire district would already be experiencing some compression, and then a little bit to the water and soil district. Important to understand that the cities are giving up a service, meaning plausibly there's general fund surplus for what was being paid to the fire department beforehand. If we're assuming the worst case scenario, the biggest challenge to overcome when looking at this is the county's public safety levy, which would be the first compressed in this scenario, and they're not giving up a fire department, and so that's a challenge. That is the one entity impacted here, or in Eugene. In Springfield, we have to assume the county and Willamette Lane would both feel the impacts of compression created by the fire district. So when we think about revenue, again, this is just a snapshot out of the budget. You all have seen it, where we grew year over year. The revenue considerations, the district's general fund would be 18.7 or 18.8 million roughly in revenue, which exceeds our current general fund plus the fire levy. Or about $1.5 million in new revenue that would be available to meet some of those needs that we talked about earlier. Other considerations just for, the breakdown between assessed value and property taxes. There's a greater volume of assessed value with some more business and industry over in Eugene as compared to Springfield, and that population ratio flips a little bit or decreases a little bit. Not a surprise, but just something worth considering. Again, to kind of wrap the district discussion up, it's a new form of government. It's a separate elected body. It does have a single focus. It's funded by property taxes. That's the only method outside of ambulance service that a district might have. In Oregon, most districts are typically rural, and we saw the boundaries are set already. So catch up with my slides here. All right. So the intergovernmental entity, you guys probably have heard more about this when we think about the report that we got from AP Triton. This was their recommendation. It is an independent public body, but also a municipal corporation because it comes from the joint efforts or through a 190 agreement between the cities. Power and responsibility is delegated by the cities. It's new board. Typically, they're single service. Can be funded by more than one city. Could be up to multiple. Does not have any taxing authority, but cities can authorize an IGE to adopt fees to help support the service. And that's not the recommendation, but that's how we're going to talk about the IGE is understanding is we have needs to grow in both of the communities we serve. We need to identify what the long-term and stable funding might be. This IGE model is similar to MWMC, which I know you all are very aware of. But in this case, the IGE would be the single employer. We'd have a linear reporting structure, not specifically part of one city, a separate entity altogether with separate systems. But unlike the district, its focus is urban service delivery. The sample form, not unachievable, but a number of deal or process points that need to be discussed once a recommendation is made, and how exactly we will hit those points, how we'll fund it, who will sit on the board, our equipment, our assets, and then what exactly that IGA looks like in the end that forms the IGE. That could take up to 2 years once a decision is made. IGE revenues, fortunately, this isn't as nearly as complicated as talking about compression. When we look at the budget and we think about those stable, efficient, scalable with a governance model that ensures long-term stability and grows with the community, we look towards the potential for creating that same $1.5 million in new revenue that the district might bring through a potential fee model. This has been studied more on the Eugene side of things over the last year or so, how exactly those systems work and what could be generated and what does it cost a typical resident. So you see those examples on the right-hand side, about $12 a month for our typical home in Springfield and $50 a month for the typical commercial property. There's another model to look at what would it take to generate $3.5 million in new system revenue. And that's where you saw that middle slide about addressing those unfunded capital needs in the system. And so just here for example purposes at the moment. Oh, push the button. Same houses we looked at before. With a look at what might that cost them in the IGE model versus the district model. And so you see far more economical for our individual properties, our commercial properties that are as large as, say, a giant store like Walmart. It does cost a little bit more in that scenario, but overall, this is just designed to look at how might that impact a property owner. Then we also look at, theoretically, as we talked about the district, we would assume that the fire levy would go away to generate that revenue. In this same scenario, this is just a look at what would the typical property pay, each one of these properties, and if you decreased the levy or eliminated the levy and implemented a fee, what would be the net increase for these properties? So again, just for example purposes, on how we might provide long-term funding and stability in the IGE model. Again, just side by side, the district at roughly $65 a month for the typical home, $12 a month for the IGE, or the higher revenue, the $17 a month to kind of fully fund what our current needs assessment is. And these are from their recommendation out of the AP Triton reports, single governance and administration. Our operational advantages are retained. There's still oversight by both cities. Financial impacts are manageable. ESF staff experience is positive. Impact on city administration is reduced. Sustainability and long-term planning for our staff and a reasonable time to implement. What comes next? Obviously, we're here today on November 10th. The city manager in Eugene is going to make a recommendation to council on December 10th. There's still still internal discussion on the review panel and how they can help as we round the corner on a decision. And then hopefully we have time in the first quarter of 2026 to come back with a recommendation or discuss what occurs on December 10th in Eugene. That was a lot of words. Surprisingly, I cut it short.
Thank you, Chief. And your photography and animation, quite good on your PowerPoint slides.
So I got to give credit where credit's due. The presentation I stole from Sarah Maderi. And so the artwork transitions, I learned a lot about it, helping make these. But Janelle and Mike did the Springfield photos. But we wanted to try to make this as Springfield as possible. So,
And we appreciate it. And I'm assuming on the Eugene side, like the Eugene saw their version of roughly the same narrative.
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And I think we're ready to open up for questions. Remember, I don't think we're trying to get to a solution tonight. This is just an information only and get some of the questions you might have out on the table. Counselor Stout.
Thank you, guys. You guys are amazing. You're incredible professionals, and the fire department has been underfunded for years. So let's just start with that as a comment. On your fire fee, is it possible if we were not to go down the IGE route, but instead go to individual departments, that council could issue a fire fee to go along with that, or would it have to be done through the IGE model?
No, that's one of those things I think that's interesting. If that's the direction that's chosen, is both could start to fund it as we build the systems and put it in place, independent of the IGE issuing it.
Okay, that's excellent. And then just two. Okay, one other shorter question is, when you're looking at sprinkling commercial properties, especially, or adopting a fee for commercial properties, one of the concerns I have is looking at properties perhaps a little bit differently that have full sprinkler systems in place versus the ones that don't have full sprinkler systems in place. Because it seems that it's a good faith effort on behalf of the property owner, not just for their insurance bill, but also perhaps for their fire fee bill, to increase the level of safety if we're walking into a sprinkled facility versus an unsprinkled facility. I'm just throwing that out there for consideration in terms of your proposals. I think the big question, though, this is really the one, is in the IGE model, how is there oversight by both cities if what we have is a separate elected body to provide the oversight?
So in that model, through your internal processes, you would appoint counselors to that. But that's one of the decision points, right? That will be probably one of the maybe more difficult ones to work through is volume of representation on that board between the two cities. And then, but it would be elected officials. You could also establish that board similar to MWMC that has counselors and then council appointed representatives from their community. So there's various ways to do that, but at its core, you could just choose to appoint counselors from each city to oversight.
Counselor Mo.
The proposal to Eugene, is it going to be similar to this one?
So Eugene got the same presentation,
Yeah.
and then the city manager will make a recommendation to council.
Because I've seen different versions over there in the past, not now, on stormwater fees or different kinds of fees attached to the fire. And I guess that didn't go over very well. So I don't know how you're going to do it now. Now, you said if we transferred or set this up, our general budget, our general taxing would be less because that fire part for fire would go over to the new district, correct?
It could be. In the presentation, we assume that it's not, because unless you have a charter amendment that limits your taxing ability, you're not legally required to reduce that.
But what I'm trying to identify is we do that, and we have another tax out here onto the present tax. How much is that going to be?
So that takes the current tax rate from 1078 to 1347 if there's no reduction, which is high. And that doesn't take into account if any other new districts or tax levies are established thereafter. That will just further compress the system.
And that's been my concern all along is how much more will Springfield taxpayers have to pay? I don't know. I want to do the right thing and I will go along with anything that they want, but it needs to be presented to them and I need for them to support it.
I've got, I guess, a couple of questions here. One of the things the presentation talks about is sort of new, like needed new revenue. And I know that we're talking about in the long time horizon sort of range. If we think about the gap between what we're spending now and potentially what the firefighter, like the fire department actually needs, how big is that gap? Is that where the 1.5 million is coming from?
So when you project in the 5-year forecast here in the next year or so, we're going to be at $1 million deficit in the ambulance. We're working on strategies to address that. When we look at administrative gaps between the two, regardless of whether we go this path or we fully account for the current structure, that's another $1 million roughly.
So as a city, right, and the net difference between sort of what we're paying today and what you're saying we ultimately need to meet, our service is 2.5, maybe $3 million.
Correct.
Okay. I think the next question that I have is when you think about like you presented sort of a service fee type model, right? If we go with the intergovernmental entity, is the city obligated to choose that specific service fee type model? So could we find a scenario where the city of Eugene chose to fund their portion by one way and we chose to fund our portion by another way?
Yes, it's a great question. At its core, the IGE can be established however the two cities agree, as long as they can agree on what the fee or the member fee to participate is, and how they fully fund that need. So yeah.
And is it fair when I look at the district option to think about it like the way I read the presentation would be that effectively based on our compression numbers right now, that we are pushing like the obligation for a fire district would get pushed sort of down the line towards homeowners opposed to commercial properties?
Yes, and the net revenue, the $1.5 million in there assumes the revenue that comes from Kinsey. If you look just within the city limits of Springfield, that net new revenue is about $800,000. Is all that's really left to be able to pull out of it.
Okay. And I think I'm going to make a couple comments about the IG in general. And I know the IG by far is the hardest to understand, right? Because it could come in so many different varieties. How many people are voting? Like who owns what, right? Like there's a million questions here. A couple of things that are really important to me in this discussion are that whoever the city managers really need to be the people that are driving the budgetary decisions, at the IG level. So by that, I mean, if we go that route, is that the cities are actually choosing their service level and rolling it up, opposed to MWMC. MWMC sort of makes the decisions and sort of pushes it back down. The other piece that I think is critical in that conversation is that it's important to me that the city managers are the ones that are jointly supervising and hiring the fire chief and not whatever the committee is. Because that allows for some sort of broader strategic, direction. Like when I go through the material, I mean, there's some details to work out, but I think I want to say those statements out early on is that really protecting the role of our city managers and balancing that with the electoral oversight is critical to me here. Okay, what other questions do we have? All right, Nancy, is the the presentation had the Eugene City Manager making a recommendation. When we play this out a couple of weeks, are you planning on coming back to us with a recommendation?
I love it when the mayor just, pops a question at me and it's just a little tiny question. I think that this is, we're in two different time periods. I think Eugene is in a different scenario because their city manager is retiring at the end of the year. And I applaud her because she is really trying to, do as much as she can before she goes, including starting her council off on that path. It was not my intent to come to you at our next check-in with a full recommendation. I think that what I would like to do is have this council discuss this further, and if because there's some concepts here that we've talked about tonight that you all haven't really seen before, to the same level of depth that has been discussed within the city of Eugene. And so there are a couple things that I would want to weigh. One would be, if the council, what your various feelings are on, given the information you've seen tonight on the two options that were presented. I think I know what you might be saying, but I want to hear more. And then based on that feedback, maybe coming to you with some of those discussion points and negotiation points that are important to you as council members and where we could go with that. I think also there's some basic concept that I would like to propose with a total recommendation. So we need to see how those numbers pencil out before I could say, yes, I can definitively give you a recommendation, because there's a little bit too many unknowns for me to be able to promise that right now. I'd rather under promise and over deliver.
All right, now it's time to, I guess, to share some more opinions if anybody's got more opinions. I already looked this direction.
Because I don't really have opinion. I mean, I have opinions
What?
and everybody knows my opinions. I think I just want to thank you very much for doing this. And I know, to Counselor Mo's point, he's been wanting to see numbers. So the more numbers you can throw at Counselor Mo, the better, I think, to get to the decision making. And I really appreciate the conversation. I hope we have more of this about the navigating who's going to be impacted and how. I think is really helpful to think about how is it going to impact our commercial property owners, and how is it going to impact our homeowners, I think is really important. And I think when we come to the city manager's point, when we come back, if she's not going to make us a recommendation, some of the things that I'd like to bring back into the conversation is us just thinking about the workforce and how they're going to be impacted either way. I think we're going to have it's going to be interesting to see what the city manager in Eugene recommends, because I think the governance model for if we go with an IGE is going to be a sticky conversation. And so I think it's going to be helpful for us to be thinking about that. Like, what would we want to see that would make us feel both empowered and have trust here in Springfield? So not necessarily opinions, but more thoughts. And I just really appreciate that we're continuing this conversation, because the city manager can attest to probably every time we meet, I'm like, how are we doing with fire? And just keeping it moving forward has been important to me. So thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? I think to the comment that you made, like, the details of governance here become really important. I'm not concerned that we won't be able to figure those out. We have a lot of intergovernmental entities that work successfully with our partners in Eugene that have this sort of balance between how many votes do you get? How do you veto one portion? MPC's, a good example of that. MWMC has a model that works. So I would assume that we would be able to find some sort of model that works out. I think when we talk through this again, I think the thing that really sticks out to me is being able to find something that starts us down the path to kind of close that long-term ambulance gap and get us to the point that we're doing the long-term planning to be successful in the presentation. And maybe this is a question I would love to see more information about. on an IG model, it seems like we're running like 2 to 5 years to really sort of set it up. But at what point do we get to the kind of the long range and strategic conversation, in that, is it really at the end of that 5 years, or is it like once we have a model, we can start diving into some of these other strategic plan conversations? Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to make sure I clarify my statement so that everybody understands what I'm saying, because the question was posed, would I be giving a recommendation the next time I come to council? Probably not, because we have a lot to discuss on this issue. Am I reluctant to give a recommendation? I have no problem giving a recommendation to this governing body. I just want to make sure that we have all of the information, that we've done all of the outreach with our community, that we've done those kind of calculations that you've mentioned up here tonight. Is that feasible? I'll probably be doing a check-in before we have all of that data. I don't want to leave that much of a gap. So I think there will be an intermediate check-in point with this government as we talk more about a funding structure or some of the major negotiation points that are important to you as the council. And then I have no problem with giving a recommendation.
Could we do a recommendation near when Eugene gets its information? And I know that they sound like they're going to get it near, if it's not their last meeting for the winter, it could be, it's pretty darn close. So I'm not as concerned like if we don't see it until early January. But in my mind, whatever goes to the Eugene Council, you will have had some sort of check-in with your colleague over there to make sure you guys are roughly on at least understand each other's thinking. So I would think from a timing perspective, either we're doing it near Eugene Council or right when we come back or pretty close to it.
I think mid-January or mid to late January is a realistic time to engage in this. But again, I would give a recommendation on direction, and there are a number of details that would still need to be negotiated and worked forward.
Okay, so I agree with that that you're going to get us pointed to a cardinal direction, understanding the details are going to fly out. Okay, Councilor Mo.
We've been talking about the increase in fire. Ambulance service is going like crazy. I don't know what we're going to do about it, but I'm hoping there is some solution out there that can help slow that down, because that's a big factor.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we've got both the countywide process. We'll also be coming back with some fee discussion on how to better recover those dollars. But that is one of those places where both cities, 2 different ambulance systems are strained. So wherever we can bring and do things one way would be ideal, ambulances and beyond.
Okay. I know you.
Do we have 2 separate ambulance services?
Sure do. Every operational change we make negatively impacts the other city every time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Councilor Buck.
Thank you. I want to just kind of highlight a couple of things that came up. I really appreciate Nancy's comments about, we have to make sure we're the order of operations, right? You gotta add and subtract before you multiply and divide. And so I think that's really important to make sure we're going through that process. And then again, and this is kind of one of my points I keep hammering on. So from a public consumption standpoint, right? I can see there being confusion. It's like the public supports the fire district and public safety. It's critical. I don't think there's any question about that. And they just passed a levy, so I can see we have some work to do on transparency with like, okay, wait a second. Now, why are we having this discussion like, the next week kind of thing? So as we go through this, being able to kind of conceptualize this for the general public who may not understand the model, since we're at a place where we don't fully have a grasp on the model, the public won't as well. So factoring that in, how are we going to communicate this in a way that the public can digest it and say, oh, I get what we're doing and I get why we're doing it. This was to Councilor Mo's point earlier as well. And so that's just a thought that I have out there. Not that I think we're not doing that. I just think it's very important, because if you say to the average homeowner, it's going to cost you a little more each month for fire. They understand why. I think a lot of people are going to get on board, but if they don't understand why, and they're like, wait a second, we just did this other thing, and now we're doing something else, that's where we can get ourselves into trouble.
All right. I think we've got enough comments. Do you have enough direction?
I mean, it makes sense. So one thing I would just take an opportunity to add as you guys think about this, and how this gets structured, is to come at it with an open mind. The more things that are different will continue us in the same environment where it's really difficult to plan a long-term future. And so that part of how we go about our work will be important, as we try to come together as one organization.
And I will note that, like, I think all of our goal is to get the fire department to the point where they have that long-term planning going on, because that is a gap that we all see out there and that we're trying to get past. The other thing, I am supportive if we need to go back to the fire governance committee to kind of work out some of these details, because I realize you guys are in the middle of the ultimate game of phone tag, right? Between taking information over to the city of Eugene, over to us, and we're both trying to make a decision kind of at the same time. We need to roughly end up at the same spot. So if we need to do some creativity as far as getting the committees back together to hash out some of these details, or at least a model we can respond to, I would be supportive of that. Nancy?
Just kind of a parting observation. I know this evening we're focused on our fire services, but I also want to point out that our police services also rely on a 5-year local option levy for their department budget, and they have a very low staffing ratio per 1,000 of population in our city. So, I'm very cognizant that I don't want to create a winner and loser situation here. I'm also trying not to complicate this matter, but I want to also recognize that public safety includes our police and jail as well as our municipal court. So there's a lot of moving parts to this conversation.
Okay, we gotta get wrapped up so we can go and see that.
One statement, I'm curious to see how Eugene handles it. And then I asked for numbers, I got numbers. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Thank you for bringing your staff along. We are adjourned from the work session. We are going to take a small pause, so as we get ready for CETA.